You're free, but is freedom without direction, support, or dignity a different kind of sentence? Welcome to End the Violence. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to End the Violence. I am here with my two brothers, Atiba and Andre. What's going on, everybody? How you doing? How's the week been?
It's been great, man. Good to be back.
Great, great. Weather's good here in Ohio.
Yeah, Atiba, tell you End the Violence back in Columbus. You guys got an RV. What's your plan with that?
Yeah, we got an RV. We got it wrapped with in the violence on it. It's like a mobile safe spot. So, we're just looking at what's going on in the world. There's just like a lot of I think there's a lot of concern in government, I think now, and in local communities, just about how this summer might go. There's been a lot of information that's saying, hey, this might be a really, really wild summer in terms of like violence, and we really want to just get ahead of that curve. So, getting ahead of the curve, we figured, hey, we'll do like a mobile RV that we can take around town, gives us the ability to pull up parks, communities, things like that. Our intervention specialists, navigators, and things will be jumping out of the truck, hanging in, areas that are potential hotspots for summer violence, and just trying to have a positive presence like in the community. I think it's going to go over really well. I mean, the staff and the people who work with us come from these communities, so it's not like this is, it's not like something foreign. I mean, I know you see police departments, law enforcement, and people utilize like RVs, and it's kind of like a tactical thing. This is a community thing for us. I mean, we're pulling up with music and just good vibes and sharing the message of community safety. Again, we're trying to push community safety. Let's take control of our own communities and get out here. So what we're hoping is that like the community will see the mobile unit pull up, they'll embrace us. Kids. We want it to look like. I mean, we gonna get a jingle on there. I told Doc. I said, let's. Yeah, we plan to have a community presence. Jump out the truck. Hang out at some parks. You know, I've been telling them like we got to get a grill for this thing. We got to throw a grill outside and do some tailgating. So.
Yes.
We're excited about it. We're definitely excited about it. We're definitely excited to get out and do something different, bring some music and bring some joy and, have something positive. Hopefully kids and people, adults in the community see us and want to pull up and holler and talk to people and see what people are doing. So this was Doc's idea, Dr. Sean Stevenson. He felt like, this was something that not only we could use here locally in Central Ohio, he's also interested in taking it around the country. So, it'd be interesting. I'll keep you updated how it's going. In fact, as soon as we're done with this taping, I'm going out to meet them. They're actually going to be pulling it up to a county event, and we just want to have that presence pretty much everywhere we go.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you said what metrics or you said you people believe that this is going to be a hot summer as far as an uptick in violence. What
Mhm.
how do you guys get that information?
Well, you know, I think a lot of it is just kind of, like anecdotal. A lot of it is just kind of us pulling things together. But if you look at the fact that there's a shakeup at the federal level, a lot of the funding streams are changing for local communities. And that's currently happening in government. So I'm assuming that local governments are dealing with this all around the country. But a lot of programs are losing funding. And anytime you have something that is going to adversely impact resources that are out there for the community in a time where inflation rates are high, interest rates are high, people are already struggling to survive and do the things that they need to do. You add that on top of the fact that we're, a few years removed from COVID. I think we had a lot of, for years we had a lot of low activity just because people weren't totally sure about being out in open spaces. And I think, over the last couple of years, you did have even if it was a small percentage of people feeling like, hey, I need to be careful who I'm around. I think we're now several years removed from that. Here in Ohio, we had a long, cold winter. And anytime you have a long, cold winter, that usually translates into a hot, violent summer. So we just want to be prepared, especially we want to be prepared. When people don't got resources, they'll do what they have to do to survive.
Join that sentiment that although I'm not privy to exactly, the the path to violence that Atiba is talking about, what I can say is that there's some economic levers that have surely been pulled that Atiba's addressing as well that build up, cause a build up. Then there's some, and he mentioned the federal level. I don't know if this is fake news, so you may have to edit this out. But I've been tracking the executive order for to request a report for the whether or not Trump should enact the Insurrection Act so that people cannot gather and protest, but people will gather and protest. And so, likewise, I was reading some documents yesterday, and the federal government is arming through the military, local police. They're scaling up that armament. So they have military assets that the local police are able to use. And then so basically, they can build, instead of just outright signing the Insurrection Act and being able to impose martial law, there's kind of like a brick by brick building up of preparedness to be able to stop any form of insurrection. So when you have all these economic levers pulled and all these different things, it could line up for a pretty volatile summer. There's a lot of changes. You even go as far as 2030, that globally we're supposed to achieve certain things. Nations are supposed to achieve certain things by 2030. America has to practice a bite and blow approach because you see our public is split anyway on a lot of things. So those things could lead to, I don't want to say that it's scheduled or planned, but all of the elements are in place for a violent summer, which means arrest and all those sorts of things are going to go up.
When you say the country's split, I you
Hmm.
know I think the country. I don't know how split the country truly is because the only people you really truly hear are the people that are so far on the left or the right. I think the people who are stuck in the middle are afraid to say stuff with the fear of retribution, being canceled, losing sales, losing their job. I mean, it goes on and on. So, do you truly believe this country is as split as the media portrays it to be, or do you believe that there really are people who really do give a crap and are just too afraid to do anything about it?
I mean, maybe we just take a different approach at how we verbalize it. I think maybe split might even be strong, but I would definitely say that there is a polarization. Maybe it might be 30-70, 40-60, et cetera, but there's a polarization to opposite ends of where we are on this, um, on the cost. Of course, the polls are out now. I don't know how much we trust the polls, but they're saying, that Trump's ratings are down because the economy's tanking, et cetera. But a lot of these things are happening because there is, again, one of those now pop culture words. There's a great reset afoot, and that is an economic reset to the blockchain for all accounting to move there, economic reset for digital currency. We move from bank digital currency on our debit cards to central bank digital currencies, and everything is just shifting. Banking, so people are concerned, and where you stand on that, I guess, would be that polarization. But a 50-50 I can't validate a 50-50.
Yeah, I agree. I think it, you know if we're going to say the country, I would agree. I think it's more divided than at any time in the history of my life. I agree with you. Most people tend to be moderate in their views. They tend to be in the middle. So like, and that's historical. I believe fundamentally, if you were to sit down and talk to people, everyone is the majority and the masses of people are still in the middle. But I feel like media has really put a weird spin on things in the last 10 years or so, and now you have people that believe the other side is evil. We don't have like years ago, back in the mid 90s when I first started working in nonprofit and government in Central Ohio. I was just out of graduate school, and I remember in Central Ohio, we were still pretty divided between both parties. And so, our city council was pretty mixed up. We were transitioning from a Republican mayor to a Democratic mayor. I felt at the county level, there was like two Republican commissioners, one Democrat commissioners, and things worked. There was always these what I would call healthy debates on each side. I mean, you could listen to what a Republican was saying at the time was was heavy Democrat, and even if I didn't agree with some of those ideas or philosophies, I understood where they were coming from and what they were rooted in, and there was civil discussion about it, and I felt like that was the best for the city. Um, People could agree to disagree, and you could understand why people push some of the policies that they were pushing. Now, it's different now. So I mean, I hate to say it. I think now when you talk to people, people are a lot more dug in, and I feel like the media has exploited a few social issues, and that's polarized. That's made people like just kind of take sides. It's like if you agree with this, you know, you're anti this, and I can't like you. Like, what I mean? I never seen this before, but it's like there are people I feel that believe Trump is like this evil person, like the devil. They believe it wholeheartedly to the point that even if the message is right, they reject it because of who he is and the message and the messenger. So I mean, it's really kind of fucked up to say that. Like, yeah, we're divided, but I feel it more now. I mean, I got family members that won't even talk to me since Trump was in office. They don't know who I voted for, but because I have really advocated for what I felt like were policies good for me, for the American people, for our communities and things like that. No, it's just you support this person or this idea and you're bad. And I feel like we get that in the media right now. If you 100 days in, if you look at the media and you look at CNN and what they're reporting on the president's 100 days, it'll be totally different than what you look at it on Fox. And so I feel like journalism years and years ago was about getting the story out and getting the truth out. But now, I mean, okay, let me just say this. Look at the election. Look at the election. All the major news stations that were supportive of liberal initiatives all reported that, Trump was going to get killed. That he was going to, there's no way he could possibly make. And then when all of that turned out to be, bullshit, for lack of better words, is straight up fucking bullshit. Everybody's looking around saying, "Well, how could this happen? How could you analyze this and that?" Because they were lying. You know what I'm saying? And it's still going on today. It's like we're not getting good journalism out here.
Well,
Agendas being played out on media.
I hope the media keeps doing what they're doing because it allows us to be successful with what we're doing, which is podcasts and just truly representing, hopefully, the voice of how most of the people feel. You know, my question to both of you is, do you believe the media is helping or hurting the urban communities, and more specifically, organizations like End the Violence?
The media is hurting,
Mhm.
and let me just say this. There are media outlets and personalities that come and seek each in the violence out for good news and good coverage and good stories. So I don't mean this in disrespect to them. What I'm going to say is overall, if you look at it from a 50,000 foot perspective and you're just staring down on it, the media has shaped the way people feel about communities, especially urban communities all over the world. And I feel like that's extremely detrimental because, you know, there's a lack of understanding for what's going on in some of these communities. And that lack of understanding leads people to be misinformed. And when people are misinformed and they're moving on the information that they have, they generally are going to make some bad decisions. It's like we talk about community safety in the violence, and I think if we had a chance to sit down and explain the work that we do, most citizens would say, "Well, that's great. They're taking responsibility for their own communities. They're going into these communities using people who were a problem in the community to uplift the community." But because there's so much negative coverage of things that happen and a lack of positive coverage, the average person has ideas set in their mind that aren't necessarily true. And I say that all the time. The average person thinks that the majority of people in these urban environments are criminals, and that's as far from the truth as it can be.
Mhm. And I would say, that the media is definitely plays its role in managing the narrative, controlling the narrative, again, how people are viewed. And then we also have to look at the bigger picture of the fact that a lot of these media outlets have been consolidated down to, I think we're down to two or three major outlets that have bought up. It was Time Warner, AOL, Viacom, et cetera, and a multitude of different ones. And now those have been really consolidated. So what is pushed through the idiot box, through the windows that we're looking through, not the window outside to the real world, but into these screens, is highly, I think, curated. Even the advertisements for so long, you didn't see a lot of people of color. Then all of a sudden, I talked about this a few podcasts back. All of a sudden, within the last 7 years, they ramped up the amount of black people of color in advertisements, fat black families to show the core family, because these are things that aren't reported on, aren't seen. So the media, the advertisers, all in sync, have been pushing more positive narratives over the last 5 to 7 years, and all of that is a part of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's goal number 16. You know, in particular. I might be wrong, but it's one of those where they're saying, a lot of the system of racism which is exploitation, has to be dismantled and reinstituted for where we're going next. And I think that, and I say it often on this podcast, that where we're going next includes everybody that will be in the haves. It was the haves and the have-nots. I guess I'll repeat that. The haves and the have-nots was the past system that racism could thrive in. Now we're moving to the haves and the have-a-lots, where color of your skin will not matter. The data will matter, and So I think that media plays a big part in controlling that narrative and now preparing our minds. Operational preparedness of the environment, OPE, is a big part of why I believe that they play such a big role.
And media is powerful. So who gets to wield that power? It's wealth gets to wield that power. Um, so it, you can look at it. Media is just marketing, and it's how you reach people. So if you can get your story out and your story's heard by the masses of people, it doesn't make your story factual. It just means that you've got an audience, and that audience, there's value to that audience.
Let me
And go
go
ahead.
ahead. Well, let me because you made me think about, for instance, let's get real granular with how the news media does certain things over the years. So if there was a crime committed, right? What is so easily recognizable that if it's a person of color, they actually tell the color. They say it was a black man or a black youth or etc. If it's others, they literally don't even mention the race. And remember, race is a construct that came about. I think it was either a French or an Italian guy, I don't remember, that actually made, drafted up this book or whatever. And from that point forward, we started designating black people, white people, this people. Before that, race wasn't even discussed. We know about the Moors in Spain and other parts of Europe and things like that, the Black Moors, the Blackamoors. And so we realized that black folk, people of color, were all over the globe. They were in America before Columbus. They came before Columbus, right? And so they were coming across from West Africa on that stream in the ocean. They were able to, on their boats, their ships, actually come across. So when we recognize that and we see that it was snuffed out for a period of time, who snuffed it out? The people that controlled the media, whether it was newspaper, telegraph, whatever, and at this point, television and streaming. So being very intentional about what news is put out plays such a pivotal role. And that's shifting because the whole economic mechanism is shifting.
Right.
Let me
Right.
ask. Let me ask both
And
of you though. Let me jump in really quick. How responsible do you keep the news media for the concept of racism? Do you think they're pushing that as part of their agenda and not really helping it?
well, I think it's a byproduct of misinformation. So there may have been a time historically where they were pushing that agenda, but now it's for clicks. Now and I say that because now I see white men starting to receive some of some of this negative coverage that black
Mhm.
men have received historically for generations on generations. But now when you see a mass shooting, they can't wait now to let you know that it's some some you know uh introverted white man, building bombs in his bedroom. So
And they're
now
locking up his
everybody,
parents too.
yeah, right. So
That's
now,
new.
now you see that because it's getting the clicks and the baits. But if you talk about, it's like when they use the language of, rioters versus protesters, and you know what I'm saying, like mobs that are looting versus, protesters who are gathering. So it's been done for a long time, and the problem is it's done in all the segments, and it's been disproportionately kind of targeted toward black men. I mean, let me add another point here. We're just talking about the media. I mean, think about historically in, like I believe it was like in the 40s and 50s when they started discovering that, hey, black people have a lot of money out here and we can kind of target them. And there were training lessons. There were literally like establishing training sessions to teach white people how to sell to black people.
They're
And
video
so
trainings. Yeah.
video training. So think about this. If you're saying, "Hey, this is how you target this group," they were doing that to profit. They weren't giving you a lot of history and context behind some of the things that were happening. We look now and we know that African Americans are designer heavy. We buy up a lot of designer fashion. People look, why are they buying, Jordans and the top shoes and the top brand? Why do they feel the need to have all that? But if you look at it in historical context, after the Civil War, African Americans were being taken advantage of, and and they were being sold very cheap products at the same price that the expensive products were. So the only tool they had to combat that was to go in and ask for name brands. So that started the whole concept. But it was these sharecroppers saying, no, go get the best because it's going to last, because they didn't want to get ripped off. Nobody tells the masses of public, like, there's a reason why black people go spend the way they do, and that they were targeted by companies that said, Sell them the best brand. Sell these products to them. Sell to them like that because they had limited information and knowledge about purchasing some of the things they were purchasing at the time. So nobody talks about the fact that we were targeted with these practices, but they talk now and they give you a snapshot. Well, black people go spend money that they don't have. They live from check to check, but they don't give you the historical context. So when people look at that information, they judge us by that information and they jump to conclusions. And hey, you guys go out and waste all your money, and why do you do some of the things that you do? We're not given the historical context of why we do some of the things that we do, and that makes it unfair. And so disproportionately, the United States of America knows the culture of the United States of America. But if you look at that from a general perspective, they don't know shit about African Americans or poor people coming from impoverished communities because the majority of America doesn't live in those communities. They only have the information that's presented to them. I think if people had more of accurate information, historical context is presented to them, like Pastor Andre just said, you talk about the Moors, the contributions that the Moors made to Americans. Most people in our country don't have a fucking clue about the contributions that the Moors made to the United States of America. They don't understand Africans populated the Americas. There's a book by Ivan Van
Sertima.
Yeah, Ivan Van Sertima. They came before Columbus. That really details historical accounts of who came here. We talk about America.
Diop as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the Moors. You could say to people, oh, United States of America, but I guarantee you the mass of people don't know there was a United States of Barbar. They don't know about the Barbar Wars that were during, before, and after the Revolutionary War. They don't know about Moorish, the architecture built here by the Moors, the colonies that were run by the Moors. They don't know about indentured servants, whites coming over here who were being enslaved by the Moors. All that history's been hidden from us. And so when we start to talk about, factual things and information, you got to remember it's all, yeah.
Well, I was going to say that narrative, because I wrote down three things as you were sharing. I mean, the narrative being controlled, the media controls that narrative, I said earlier. So let's just think of two current things. Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso, even though that's not United States, it's all over the news, it's all over social media that they chose this general to go deal with that situation because France is upset because Ibrahim Traore said, we want back all our gold that you stole from us. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars in gold that's sitting in their reserves. And so the United States has gotten involved. And what did it, just like we did with Gaddafi, and I say we because I live here, right? We did with Gaddafi and others, destabilized, coup, whatever, and said we need to go bring democracy, and then the guy is dead. Ibrahim Traore right now, everybody's watching because is this going to happen again? Is the media going to get to criminalize this guy who's actually trying to feed his people and tell those that have had their foot on their neck for so long, get the hell out of our country? That's Ibrahim Traore. How about Shador, Coach Prime's son? Let's get into sports, right? When it was what's the other gentleman was a coach, I guess, and had two sons in football, Caucasian brother?
Archie Manning, probably.
Manning, right? Two sons. When he did it, they used a different terminology in the media of he's a leader and he's this, he's guiding his sons. When Coach Prime did that to his sons, it was like, arrogant. So media gets to set these terms, to speak these words, and words are extremely powerful and put an impression in people's minds. And the last one, there's Birth of a Nation, which was a movie. Anybody remember Birth of a Nation? Criminalized black men attacking white women, and the black men had to, and that's where the KKK was first filmed and used in film to root out these black men that were raping white women. And so it created this really massive mindset. And there was one on weed too, on marijuana, that criminalized it because they couldn't tax and control it, just like liquor and cigarettes. They only released it when it could be taxed and controlled. But a lot of black people went to prison because of this movie on marijuana. I don't remember which one that was. It wasn't Birth of a Nation. No, that was separate. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I don't remember, but I know there was a whole campaign against marijuana that it made, black men sexually aggressive to white women. But there was also some of the I believe senators that were responsible for that also owned a lot of acreage that had a lot of trees, and so some of that was even for financial gains because once they outlawed marijuana then you had to use trees for paper and for a lot of materials
The
because
hemp.
people
Yeah.
think of marijuana like they think of it as people were just smoking it, but commercial hemp was most of our country, like the war wars. I mean, we use commercial hemp for ropes, for paper, for because it grows so fast. It was like bamboo. It was just
Clothing.
yeah.
Clothing. Hmm.
So to your point, it would be interesting to uh, Dr. G. Like I don't know, like do we have like maybe have to do like segments and fact check this, but this is something if I recall the if you look at the Confederate flag and everybody in the South that promotes the Confederate flag as a symbol of their heritage, the Confederacy, right, during the Civil War. And I lived in the South, and I accept they were like, no, it's not about racism. It's just our culture. This is our heritage. And I said, okay, I get with that. It's kind of weird to me because the Union was united, so the United States flag is the American flag. I don't know why like people would want to hold to the Confederate, but let's just give you that. Let's just say that. And everybody said, but it doesn't make sense because the Confederate flag that we see today wasn't the it wasn't the Confederates flag, it was a battle flag, right? And this is interesting because I actually seen this somewhere, and there are I can go try to look them up, but Dr. G, if you got staff that are real good at researching this, there are documents that suggest that the Confederate flag was taken from Moorish tribes, from Moorish. It was a Moorish battle symbol that was used in the Barbar Wars between like North and South America, some of those wars. But that flag was then taken and used as a Confederate model.
We're talking
And
culture
so
vultures here and
yeah,
appropriation.
yeah. So it'd be interesting to go back and unveil the truth and see if so many Confederate state, if they found out, hey, this Confederate flag is really a Moorish flag that you're wearing, would they feel the same about it? Would they still say, well, the Moors, they kind of led to, this, that, our history and our position in the Civil War. No one wants to talk about the contributions that the Moors made or the fact that they populated the Americas and were ran out of Europe.
So, there's so many. I wrote down a few things. Okay, so Birth of a Nation was very well covered in that Juneteenth documentary that's out. And I would recommend for all the listeners to watch that Juneteenth documentary. Um, it's actually pretty appalling uh, how that how that video portrayed African American or black men. But it did start the birth of the KKK. Number two, marijuana. Obviously, the people who say marijuana makes you sexually aggressive have never had a 15 milligram edible. That's all I got to say because you really can't do much after that. Um, and then, so you brought up an interesting point, which I want to ask because I know, Atiba, you said you're in the South. Andre, I know you spent a lot of time in the South. I don't really consider Tampa part of the South, but Central Florida definitely is the South. The media would make all of us think that the Confederate flag makes you uncomfortable. Is that a fallacy or is that true?
In the South, okay, it made me uncomfortable historically, like growing up, because it was always associated in the North with kind of like, uh, white support for Southern views. And I don't know, when I grew up and I was in school and I seen, different people that would come out like displaying the Confederate flag. At the time, it was like, why would they display this flag other than to promote that they're racist as hell? That's how I felt like in the North. I felt like all you a bunch of like racists, and this is your way of like, in a passive aggressive way, like letting the whole fucking world know. Because it really, we all should be patriotic and support the American flag and believe in the American flag. So when anybody does anything that is detrimental to that, it gets highly criticized. But when I moved down south, I had experiences where guys with Confederate flags, where I had interactions with them that were positive. I mean, I lived in Cobb County, which was like, I lived in a little city called Mapleton, which was, was a good old boy central. And my car broke. I had a flat tire, and a guy pulled over in a pickup truck flying a Confederate flag, man, just as big as his truck. Jumped out, helped me get my car back on the road, helped me fix my tire. So over time, I started to think like, not everybody who's supportive of the Confederate flag has to be necessarily racist. I think that there's just a lot of misinformation in the country, because those same people are like, well, this was the Confederate flag. But correct me if I'm wrong, that was never isn't it a battle flag? The Confederate flag that we know today is a battle flag, right? Yeah, you want me to Google it? I don't want to like look
Yeah.
away from the
That,
camera, but I've looked at, I'm one of those people that just out of curiosity over the years, like, let me just look this up and, look into it. And I'm almost certain that the Confederate flag, the way we know it and see it today, was never the Jefferson Davis flag. Let's say it like that.
I definitely would say, and I've heard about the battle flag thing, but let's definitely fact check that. I'm gonna say I have mixed feelings over it. There's a gigantic, when I say gigantic, Confederate flag off of Highway 75 South, about 5 miles from where I live, and so when I say mixed feelings, because I like to know where people stand. I want to know can I turn my back on you? You know, and so, but Atiba said something important in what he said, and that is, uh, not everybody ascribes to racism that ascribes to the Confederate flag necessarily. It might be cultural, it might be what they grew up with, and misinformation, etc. So maybe that's why I say I have mixed feelings on it, but definitely I like to know where people stand. When when Obama became president, a lot of people came out of the woodworks on how they felt in this country. When Trump became president, a lot more people came out. And I believe that when Trump said that he was going to drain the swamp, he literally meant he was going to just expose everything. Because I don't have a swamp in my backyard, but I have a pond. But at this time of year, it starts getting really low, and you can see the root system and the alligators, and they leave and go to other and find other places. So I think that for me, that flag represents, at this point, people that are repping it. For the most part, it's an exposure to a mindset potentially that I would like to be aware of. So I stick with that, saying I like to know where people stand, and that becomes a tool of that.
Yeah, and I just Googled it and looked, and the Confederate flag was 3 bars and stars. It didn't look like that. That was a battle flag. It had shit to do with the 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 Confederate as a. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And interestingly, but if we go back and really start, going and looking at a lot of the information that's out there, and really we wanted to educate people, we would have to tell a lot of truths. I know, like a couple years ago, I was watching Putin in an interview, uh, basically telling Black America, like, hey, you all have been, history's been hidden from you. And he opened up a
Mhm.
vault in Russia and show and it let out all these documents, and you saw these, you know, people of
Images, yeah.
color and the
Mhm.
history that they had. Well, we don't teach real history in the United States. Let's be honest, because the Moors, if you take the history of the world, was populated by Africans all over Europe. It was those most of those societies in Africa were developed by the Moors, and even in America, and even when they were being prosecuted, run out of England through France and Spain, they were coming back to Americas. But if you say this to people today, they'd be like, what are you talking about? If you say the masses of white people got to America through indentured servitude, they would call you crazy. And if you said those white people who were coming over during those during that time, let's go back to like the 1600s, 1500s, and look at the develop. Go back prior to that and look at how the world really was formed and developed. You'd have to tell a lot of truths. You'd have to talk about a lot of the symbols, the
Yeah.
Moorish symbols. You have to talk about the Knights Templar. You'd have to talk about how these, Masonic groups were formed and that information, because the average
Mhm.
person just thinks they know. It's just like typical Americans. We think we know because we listen and we're programmed by the schools.
By the
Yeah,
media too.
and the
Yeah,
media
in
and the
schools. Yeah.
media. Yeah.
Interestingly, you say that. Let's flip the scales for a moment. In the United States, uh, people of color are a minority, but quickly becoming a majority through birth, right? But globally, for all of time, primarily, well, I can't say all of time, but for a lot of our history that we know of, people of color globally are the majority. It's the global people of color are the global majority. So it's almost impossible to think, but ironically, people believe that because in the last 2, 3, 400 years, I guess, that narrative has shifted to, black people didn't make anything, et cetera. And then we have Black History Month where we try to tell everything, Henry J. Lassiter, the real McCoy, and et cetera. But it's something, I think, to your main question of media and its influence, and education and its influence as well, to as Atiba put in there. There's so much hidden. Like at the Vatican, you could always go down into the catacombs and into certain areas, and you saw the Black Virgin Mary holding Jesus, and that leads us into a whole nother conversation. But I'll leave that there.
Well,
Yeah.
what do you think the media can do to change all this stereotype? And, like you bring up the whole concept of Black History Month.
Mhm.
Shouldn't we have like Black History? Why is it just a month?
I can't stand it being a month.
Yeah, why can't we just have history? Why does it got to be a separate history? Like it's stupid as shit to me that we gotta relegate black people to having this certain part of history, and you can't have American history without black. That's America was the initial people who developed these cities and developed. Stop acting like America was just a fucking big ass planet full of dirt with a bunch of savages running around. Like it's asinine. And we're
Yeah.
all educated at this point, and we know we've read these truths, but there hasn't been any concerted effort to really educate people on truly true history and how the world was formed. And we did that, and it was so detrimental to African Americans that we just want to close the chapter on that book. But it is detrimental for African Americans that grow up and don't have anything to really identify with themselves as being like positive contributions. And so when you look in every successful person and everything that happens in the world, and it's portrayed as a white person, you know, and then you grow up and you start to read books and you start to study, you start to research, and you find out like damn, the whole world's been lied to. It's kind of disheartening.
Yeah, there's a book, The Real History of the United States or of the World. I have it on my Audible. I'm gonna pull it up before we finish. And that really starts looking at the diaries of Columbus and others, and looking at what they really found and et cetera. And now with social media and how it's proliferated, people are finding out truths, but there's also misinformation. So we really are at this point of trying to root out. I learned
Yeah.
about a lot of this stuff back in 1994 when I went to the seminary. One of my classmates was heavy into a lot of this information, and he pulled out books. That's how I learned of Ivan Van Sertima and Che
Mhm.
Cantor Diop and others. But at 52, going on 53, I'm still discovering. It might have been at my cousin's wedding 10 years ago that I was in a one of those boutique hotels, like upscale hotels, and they had busts of the Moors. And that's when I really like started digging in. Even though I had heard a bit, now I'm actually seeing the images, and the internet has again has grown to where we can see a lot of these things as well. So just interesting how our mindsets are formed, our belief systems, and stereotypes.
What really drives me crazy about history is I think what we're trying to erase history, right? And I figure if we get rid of statues and we get rid of monuments and we get rid of flags and we get rid of everything, people are going to forget the amount of pain that a lot of that was caused by certain things. Coming from my side, they barely teach the Holocaust anymore. And, now there's that misbelief that the Holocaust was all fake. Um,
Mm.
if you get rid of history, you forget about history. Do you agree?
I think history is important. I mean, I think you have to know where you come from, and I think we should be unapologetic about history because that's the only way we're gonna learn. And so let's just sit down and open up the books and be truthful about it because then we can heal. We don't have to go back and use history to beat people up, but we can use it to move forward. And we got to accept the rights and wrongs that we did in history. And every side wants to be squeaky clean. I mean, I feel like, you have now you have white historians who try to make it a point to promote, European contributions or white contributions, for lack of a better word, Caucasian contributions to, and then you have on the flip side of that, you have black historians that are pointing to what black, but we just need the truth. We just need to get the truth out there because there's pros and cons to both sides.
Yeah.
For all the great accomplishments of the Moors, they also did bad things. For great accomplishments of white Europeans, they also done bad things. But everybody gets caught up into let's just forget about it and move on. I mean, well, it doesn't give how do you plot a course to move forward if you're not
Yeah.
willing to know where you came from?
I mean, I'll use some famous idioms or think quips that people use. It needs to, if you forget your if you ignore history, you're bound to repeat the mistakes of the past. That's one of those sayings, right? The other one is it ends up, the dominant culture a lot of times will end up telling his story
Mhm.
instead of the truth. And so those things have to be identified. So, I mean, definitely history is valuable. It allows us to break cycles. And I don't want to go back into the cycle that we've had in the past. I see where to me, I see a not necessarily so much a bright future, but a different future. Where remember in our last session, I said, I learned a long time ago to make sure I had all my paperwork was right. Now, as we move into a digitally transformed world, I want to make sure all my data is right, so I can get that loan, so I can get that property, so I can get that contract, so I can because a lot of people are up in arms over the changes that Trump made with the government contracts, and whether you're a minority vendor or X, Y, and Z. And I actually saw it differently. I saw it that it's just a leveling of the playing field so we can go digital. And so you just have to have your stuff right. You can't come half stepping anymore. So the people that come right as we move forward, they're going to get through. But we cannot forget the history because it can definitely be repeated.
Yeah, so in closing, what I want to just basically tell the audience is the only way you usually become a better person, a better businessman, a better parent, a better friend is to look at the mistakes you've made in the past so you don't repeat them. If we start forgetting history and we start forgetting what horrible things happened to people of all race, religion, sex in the past, we're bound to repeat them. And how are we going to become better as a people, as a society, and as a nation? Andre, Atiba, it was great talking to you guys today. We'll see you all next week, and we'll hopefully get back onto the recidivism chain. But today was more about let's see what we can do to try to change the cycle of how people are really talking about and really feeling, and hopefully opening their voice. Talk to you next time.